Hi, welcome back to the workshop for episode 13 of the Micawber Telecaster build, where I'm going to be taking a more in-depth look into the wiring. I get a fair amount of feedback from people that wiring up guitars is the one element that freaks them out and they can't get their head around it. So I'm going to spend a little bit more time on this job talking you through it so you can see that it's not rocket science. It is actually fairly straightforward, and as long as you've got a few skills down, you'll be fine. Okay, before I get started on the Telecaster, I just want to do a check on this switch to make sure that the information I'm getting off the wiring diagram is correct. And the way I can do that is just by running some simple continuity checks. So what the wiring diagram is telling me is that these two contacts here are the output, and these two contacts here are for the bridge pickup. And as you can see there, I've got my multimeter set to my lowest ohms range, so it's set for 200 ohms, and I'm getting a reading there. If I take it off, it will go back to just displaying 1, which means I've got an open circuit. Okay, so the switch is set to the bridge position and I'm getting continuity, so that means that's correct. If I move it into the middle position, which should be both pickups on, I'm still getting continuity. And then if I move my probe to that lug, which is the connection for the neck pickup, I'm also getting continuity. So far, so good. Now the final check I need to do is to just move the selector switch again to the neck position, and we've still got continuity. However, if I then go back to the bridge position, open circuit. So that's all good. And then I just need to check that in the bridge position, I've got no continuity for the neck position. And that's correct too. So I'm happy with that. That means that the switch is doing what it says it does on the tin, so we can continue to wire this up now. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is to wire in that output from the switch into the volume pot. So that needs to go from the middle two connectors on the switch to this top connector on the volume pot, and that also needs to go across to the tone pot. I've got two colours of wire that I'm going to use on this. I'm going to use red for the signal path and I'm going to use black for the ground. So the first thing I'll do is I'll just cut a little piece of wire that's a suitable size for both of those connections. And then just strip off the insulation. And I'm just going to hold my wire in my handy little helping hand jig thingy and just tin the ends of these wires. So simply I'm just going to dab a little bit of solder onto the iron, hold that against the wire, let it heat up, and then just run some solder along the section of wire that you're going to be soldering. Then I'm just going to tin all the terminals I'm going to solder to in this operation. Okay, so there's the first two connections done. Just trim them up a little bit. So next up I'm going to solder on the section of wire that is going to run to the output jack. So just the same process. Tin the wire. Tin the lug. Solder it in place. Now I'm not going to trim this yet, I'm going to leave that the full length of wire, and then we can figure out how long it needs to be when we solder on the output jack. Okay, so next up is putting the capacitor on. Now the capacitor needs to run from the tone pot, so it runs from the central lug of the tone pot to this lug on the volume pot, but also needs to be grounded to the volume pot. So what we'll do is we'll bend that as close as we can. This can be a little bit of a fiddle sometimes. I've soldered the static end in, cut the leg off, and I'm just going to position that fairly nicely. Now before I solder this on, I'm just going to put a little dab of solder onto the pot case. Then solder everything together. As neat as I can. As you can see, I'm using modern plastic covered wire for this project. You can get the cloth covered stuff, which is more authentic and kind of in keeping with a vintage guitar. However, it's harder to work with. I can never really get it very neat, and it really doesn't make any difference to the sound whatsoever. So for little details like that are hidden away in the guitar, for me it doesn't really make sense to spend extra money and go to extra effort. In terms of the rest of the components on here, it's a simple three-way selector switch. This one's suitable for a Telecaster or a Stratocaster. You just have to slightly modify it for a Strat. Two 250k CTS pots. I tend to always use CTS pots. They are a little bit more expensive, but they do make a difference in my opinion. Now this is a setup I would use for a standard Telecaster with two single coil pickups. Obviously we've got a humbucker in the neck of this one, so that might cause some complications further on down the line. It's one of those things, we'll have to have a listen to it and see how it sounds. It could be the case that it doesn't work for the customer, and then we might have to adjust the cap value or maybe the tone pot. We'll wait and see. Okay, so next up is to put the one ground wire in that we need at this stage, and that is the one that's going to go from this pot out to the output jack. Now, I've already put a couple of little blobs of solder onto the pot. This one at the front is where I'm going to be putting the output wire, and the one at the back is where I will mount the two ground wires that will come from the pickup. Now, on a Telecaster, there's less ground wires than you would normally have, for the simple reason that the bridge is grounded through the bridge pickup. So there's no need for that additional wire in that circumstance. So I've just pre-tinned this little bit of wire, and I'm simply going to drop it onto the blob of solder that I've already put on. Now, when you're wiring stuff to pots, it can take a little bit of time for the solder to melt, especially if you've got quite a wimpy soldering iron, as I have. There we go. It's a good tip as well, if you are soldering stuff that's not fixed in position, you can hold it down, as I am in this case with this little pair of pliers, just until the solder hardens up again. Okay, so all that leaves now is to attach the output jack. Now, I've already worked out with this wire that it needs to be kind of about 3 inches past the tone pot. So I've probably got 4 inches there, just to allow me a little bit of extra to play with. So I'm going to trim the black wire down now to match that one. And really just exactly the same process. Tin the wire. Now, in terms of these output jacks, the lug that's opposite from the little contact that touches the tip of your jack plug is the hot wire, and the other one is your ground. And there we are, done. I'll just put that on so I don't lose it. So in terms of what we've done, we've got the output from the switch is feeding into one of the lugs on the volume pot, which in turn feeds to this lug on the tone pot. We've then got the capacitor that goes from the central lug of the tone pot to the third lug of the volume pot, which is then grounded to the body of the volume pot. And then we've got a hot wire going from the central lug of the volume pot to the output. And this ground going from the volume pot body to the other lug on the output. Just like that. So there we have it. That's basically all we need to do at this stage. So once we've got everything into the body, we can connect the neck pickup to those two lugs, bridge pickup to those two lugs, and the ground wires from the pickups onto the volume pot body, and we're good to go. Like I said, Telecaster wiring is relatively straightforward. Now I'm quite happy with that. I think that's nice and neat. It does what it needs to do. The soldering is good, it's robust, it's not going to fall to pieces. You'll see people go to extraordinary lengths with their wiring to make it look beautiful, and then hide it away in the body. Personally, I can't see the point. If it works and it does the job it's supposed to do and keeps on doing that job, it's perfectly fit for purpose. Okay, so hopefully you can see from that that wiring doesn't have to be an absolute nightmare. Admittedly, a Telecaster is quite a straightforward job, but as long as you follow the diagram, break it down into sections and just follow it through in a logical fashion, you can generally get the job done without any issues at all. Okay, so that's the wiring done. Next job is to get the body out and start to flat and polish that, but I'm going to leave that to the next episode. I hope this more in-depth look at the wiring has been useful. If so, give me a like. If you haven't already done so, subscribe to the channel, and I'll look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye bye.